Hello, welcome back to the second episode of Training Basics, our series in which we will do 5 episodes and we'll go from setting the goals into knowing what training is, what do we want to train, how do we want to train, and for those who don't have a coach, have a way of setting your season up. So for today's episode, we'll get into base training, probably as the name says, the foundations of endurance training. We'll get into what's base training, how to find your base, know if you are working your base accordingly, also different ways of working the base. And yeah, that should be it. So coach, what is base training?
Well, base training is used to be said to the easy mile type of riding where you go out for 5-6 hours and you don't think about anything. You just ride, just like Eddie Merckx said. Um, but nowadays we have a lot of tools we can use to understand how we can do that a bit more efficient, as well as uh, having some rough understanding on where we want to be and how to make that better and to save time, because maybe not everybody has 20 hours per week to train their base. So if you only have, let's say, half of it, 10 or even less, 6 hours, should you do it? Is it worth doing it? Or should you do a higher pace, a higher power? Should you look into the heart rate or no? But sometimes having so many markers and things to look for, we get a bit lost into the what's really important in base training and what actually means base and zone 2, which is the foundation, your engine that you need to develop in order to have to be able to make use of everything that you want to in a race. Or so if you want, for example, to increase your VO2 max or your 5-minute power or 20-minute power, in order to do those high intensity workouts that will push your aerobic, you first have to do first have to develop a really good aerobic base, because otherwise maybe 3 intervals of 4 minutes is not enough. Maybe it is for the first 2 weeks, but then your body gets used to that and it doesn't adapt anymore. So you can do only three intervals and you will not get an adaptation from that.
Also, like, the reason why it's called base is because we usually use that pyramid in which we define the zones of aerobic zones, and the base is basically what sets us for the rest of zones. So it's actually the base of the pyramid, and it's everything that will allow us to build the rest of the zones. Now, if we get a bit more technical, we are getting the aerobic adaptations, especially on base training. Obviously, VO2 and training LT will help you if you want to do those kind of efforts. But in the end, you need to be able to use that oxygen more efficiently. You need to have enough mitochondria so that you can push on your VO2, because otherwise you will always be limited.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's like adding a big turbine to a really slow car. It's basically useless without having a really big engine, right? So you first need the big engine, and then you can think of other things. And that big engine will also mean you will have an overall growth in your power profile. So of course your VO2 max will increase as well from base training and from the correct zone 2 training.
You can see it as it will allow the pyramid to grow taller.
Yeah.
The pyramid is limited in height by the base.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the easiest way to see it. Now in cycling, we have many ways of even identifying zone 2. We usually work with power meters.
Yeah.
Another way to use it is with heart rates, and that also applies to running, even though that for running, I like to use the pace, but you need to be an athlete that's a bit trained. Usually going by RP, that's not tracked by any power meter or any heart rate monitor. It's usually the best way to go. You want to go for an effort that's sustainable. Like you have to finish and say, okay, I could have kept going at this same pace, at this heart rate, power for God knows how many hours. Even though that after 6 hours you'll be fatigued. Like muscle fatigue is going to occur, but if you think about it aerobically, you should be feeling fine.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, we have power meters, we have heart rate you can use. We also have lactate monitors, so you can check your lactate levels. But the big problem with that is that we every day wake up with another lactate resting level. That's just for myself individually. Also, if you check the internet and whoever tests for lactate to do the zones, you will see that um, you have two inflection points which they are available for, well, not available, they are viable for most of the people, which is somehow set to 2 and 4 nanomoles. But the problem with that is that, yeah, for me it might be 2, but for you might be 2.2.
Or even less.
Or even less. Or maybe today for me is 2.2 and tomorrow is 1.8. There could be 20 to 30 watts difference.
Yes.
So how do you train? That will not be correct from day to day, right?
No, it's always an estimation that you need to.
Yeah, so you cannot really rely on that. Maybe if you do like at the beginning of the season, you do like a test just to see your base from the last year where you start. That's a good indicator. But if you want to set your zones properly and use lactate as a monitoring tool, you have to do it every session. So you buy yourself a lactate monitor, you go out with it, you pinch yourself from time to time, and you learn about yourself. And yeah, but that's pretty uncomfortable.
I was, well, not only uncomfortable, but also not really common for most of us. I would say that power meters have gotten way more common now.
Yeah.
So we usually think about the watts that we produce over the lactate. We don't really, I would say that most of people don't even know about it. The thing is that people usually think about the average watts, and it's not the same, because it's very easy to see someone just going higher on a small climb and then just not pedaling, and that will say, okay, my average power is, let's say, 180 to 100 to 20, whatever your zone 2 is, but that's not really a zone 2 ride.
If you did intervals on every climb.
Yes, then maybe you still have your zone 2 average if you go really easy, but that would not be a good zone 2. So what you're looking for is just a constant pressure on the pedals. It's how I like to phrase it. You just need to keep the pace, even on the descent. This is what I tell my friends. Like, if you're going down and you're doing a zone 2, you just still have to try to push. Obviously, be safe, but the idea is that 99% of the time you are putting pressure on the pedals or running at the same pace, because it also applies, even though running it's easier.
Yeah, you're actually aiming for consistent pressure, just like you said, because you want to stress the mitochondria. You want to stay in that fat oxidation state. You want to constantly stress that. And the more adapted you get, the easier it is to go out from that state, because you recover very fast. So if you have a 10 minutes descent, your heart rate might drop, and your fat oxidation can also drop. So that will influence your training.
I think that it also the biggest change I made when I started working with you, that basically I was feeling really fatigued, really exhausted by the third, fourth hour, but on the legs. Like aerobically, I was always also having HR drift, which basically is the difference in heart rate throughout the time span of the ride or the run. Basically, if you are not adapted enough, you'll see that your heart rate just goes higher and higher slowly, but throughout the ride or the run, it just keeps going higher, even though your RPE might be low or your pace is not as fast as possible.
And power stays consistent.
Yes, and power stays consistent. So when I started making the change in, okay, I have a small climb here, I'm not Mathieu, so I'm just gonna take it easy. And you just keep the pace. And once you get to the top of it, you still pedal and you just keep the same pace. So, well, now I'm doing way more hours and way more power than before. But in the beginning, for me, doing 4 hours was just so hard. And the only change I made was just staying consistent, like consistent and pedaling as much time as possible.
And also it's important not going over, because
Exactly, no,
then you
just
get out of this.
consistent in every state, because also like you'll get into the zone and you'll tell your body we need to use this amount of glycogen for a constant amount of time and throughout the months, or honestly throughout the weeks, because it's something that you can easily gain if you keep it consistent. The benefits are insane. So yeah, we are just trying to stay consistent. And how would you explain what's happening in our body? Like, what would you say, or if you had to explain it, what is the physiological process that's going on?
What you're trying to teach your body is to use as efficient as possible the fats in your body to produce ATP. And in order to do that, you have to stay in a state where you utilize the maximum amount of fats. That's called the fatmax. And that varies really, it has a really wide range. It can be maybe 40% for some people of their VO2 max, but for some people it can be close to 80%. So based on that, how do you know what's your fat max?
That's my question to you.
Because some people, based on what I just said, let's assume your FTP is 300. Some people might have the same FTP of 300, but some people will have the fat max at 250, and maybe some people will have at 220 or 270. That's also possible. So you shrink the distance between the zones. So the easiest way to get your fat max is to understand RPE. So RPE is the rate of perceived exertion from 1 to 10, which is the easiest scale. So what you're aiming for is an effort of around 5 from 1 to 10.
And what would 5 mean in terms of RPE? So if I'm your athlete and I ask you, hey Alex, I've just finished my fatmax ride or my endurance ride, what's 1 or what's 8?
Yeah, it should be uncomfortable. But if you're trying to nose breathe, you should be able to do it, but it would be really uncomfortable and you would prefer to open your mouth.
Yes.
Or like if you do a call during your ride, you could keep up the conversation, but that would be still uncomfortable.
And you also need to take into account the muscular fatigue. It will build up, especially the harder you have to go to achieve your fat max.
Yeah, and that translates in that heart rate drift that
Yes.
you were talking about. So then, let's say on a 2-hour fatmax session, you might start at 200 watts, but maybe you end
Mm.
up at 150 doing the
Mm.
same stress. Because if you would keep the same 200 watts, you would probably burn a lot of glycogen
Yes.
instead of fats.
Yeah, and the reason why that happens is because our body doesn't really want to use fats. Because fats means that we're wasting a lot of energy that
Yeah,
it takes a lot of time to keep. And while it's very stupid, because if we were able to use our fats, we would be monsters. But our body's like, I prefer not to use them
yeah,
because in case we are starving at some point. So yeah, you need to stress that. You need to tell your body that, hey, it's fine for me to use fats. So the more advanced you get, you'll start using fats earlier, and this will mean that you will rely less on your glycogen throughout the hours. So meaning that if you have to do an LD effort after 5 hours, you would still have a lot of glycogen in stores instead because you would have had used the
yeah,
fats. And that's basically what you're aiming for in
yeah.
most of the endurance kind of efforts, that whenever you need to go really hard, you still have the glycogen, which is faster to use and easier to use
And it
than
also
fats.
helps you with the recovery because having a really good mitochondrial function, which also gets a really big boost from the base training, from the
Mm.
zone 2 endurance rides. Uh, yeah, you can recover and burn fats
Mm.
a lot more efficient. So assume you have a VO2 session, you will be able to recover after the first, second, third, fourth, ninth interval because you have a really good
Yep.
base, a really good engine. So you're able to save a bit of glycogen every interval, even if the RP is high
Yes. Well, I
for the
mean,
interval.
hard efforts are meant to be hard despite the
Yeah,
recovery. Also, we've just introduced fatmax, but not all base training is fatmax. I think fatmax is a part of training. It also adds a lot of load usually, the
yeah.
more hours you do. So you shouldn't be doing 1 week entirely of fatmax.
No, that's really
That's
hard.
really hard. But even though it's a based kind of effort, it's a really hard effort. So when you're doing a base block, you should consider doing fatmax and using fatmax as one of the goals to improve during that block. But the rest of the hours, they should be filled with something that's even lower in terms of intensity.
Yeah,
Then it depends on your recovery. If you can recover, if you don't really have the ability to recover in terms of your muscles as fast as possible, then even easier, which is what I'm doing. Like I've been suffering a lot with the TT, so I'm not doing my zone to over 65 to 70% of my FTP, which is what I was doing previously, and now I'm just going more for a 55 to 60% FTP.
since you're mentioning that, I like to organize to have 3 different endurance types
Okay.
of rides. So the first one would be like easy recovery. So like I always mention, you always have to have a why you're doing the session. So the why for every endurance type of ride, the first one is like RP 1 to 2 should be like really easy, and the aim is to recover. It shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
also long. It shouldn't be that long. Like maybe depending on the athlete, but it
Yeah.
shouldn't be more than 2 hours for sure. Even if you're going for a coffee. So the aim is recovery. The second type of endurance ride is meant to keep your endurance. So around 2 to 3 RPE, maybe 4, depending on the rider as well.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it should be in that range. And the aim is, well, keep the
Yeah.
endurance that you already built, or use that as an extra
Mm.
load. So you add uh, 2 or 3 days of medium endurance
Yes.
in order to gain a bit of load and adapt.
And these ones usually are slightly longer. Now we're going from
Yes,
more of a 2.5 up to 4, maybe 5, or even for stronger athletes, 6.
maybe up to 3, 4. But yeah, if you want uh, to make it like a key session, but also keep the RPE down, you can do it longer, like you said, like 4, 5, 6
Yeah.
hours. Yeah. And then from a an adaptation standpoint, it becomes from a session that's meant to keep your fitness, it becomes a key session that will boost your fitness. And the third one is the fatmax type of endurance ride, where yeah, it gets pretty hard on your aerobic. You're burning a lot of fats. You're also burning quite a bit of glycogen as well. So you need to make sure you're eating a lot during the fatmax sessions. And the aim for these sessions are to boost your mitochondrial function and to get like a really good boost in fitness from that session.
The workout that's supposed to help build your endurance, it's called fatmax and not glycofatmax. It doesn't seem to involve glycogen, and yet we are still getting better at something that involves glycogen a lot. And how is that? How is it that using fatmax has a direct impact to our way of using both oxygen and also glycogen?
Yeah, so your aerobic relies either on burning fats as fuel or burning glucose or glycogen, because you're not actually burning glucose. It's just a bit part from your liver, but yeah. So the aim is for your body to be able to adapt in order to use oxygen more efficiently and burn that fuel that gets into the mitochondria as efficient as possible.
So basically, everything that goes into the muscle to be used properly to generate energy, right?
Yes, everything that's aerobic. So
Yes, well,
everything that's uh, above 90 seconds of
yes, yes, of course, not
effort.
sprints,
Yes.
but yes, yes.
So cycling being an aerobic sport, an endurance sport, that's why it's called
Yes.
endurance. Everything that's above 90 seconds in effort, like full gas, relies on oxygen to be produced. And having a really good mitochondrial function and your body being able to utilize the fuel very efficiently, that will make you stronger in the end. It will boost your entire power profile. Of course, you also need to teach your body other type of adaptations in order to get stronger, but most of the times the engine that we were talking in the beginning, that's the maybe 80% of your entire,
which is what I was about to
fitness.
bring. Like, we've heard a lot about pros doing the 80-20 rule, which basically means 80% of the time at low intensity and the rest of the time at really high intensity. One misconception is that pros do 20 to 30 hours per week, so 20% of 20 hours is a lot, and that doesn't really apply to most of the athletes. So I wouldn't say it's a rule that should be used for everyone. Like, if you're training, let's say 4 hours a week because you don't really have the time, and obviously cycling is really time consuming, so it's not for all schedules. So how would you then incorporate training for somebody who doesn't really have that much time to do really long rides despite being easy? What would you say is a good alternative to boost the aerobic fitness or the base in this case?
In a base period, what you're aiming for is volume at this type of intensity. But yeah, like you mentioned, not everybody has the time to do as much as they want to do in order to boost their fitness. So you somehow have to adapt and make the most out of it. So the less time you have, the more I would say you would have to stay at that fat max intensity, or try to get there. Because if you have 88 hours available and you just started cycling, you will not be able to do 8 hours of fat max for sure. It's really hard on your body. That's because it's really hard if you do it correctly.
Yes.
And one thing I always teach my athletes is that during a zone 2 ride or fat max session, just try to at some point stop from your let's say 250 watts that you have to keep consistent, and do for 1 to 2 minutes do your FTP, and then come back to your fat max. That will feel really easy. You can finish the session really easy. Your RP will drop actually. But if you stay at that fat max intensity, that will be really taxing and you'll get really fatigued.
So you would say, instead of trying to go for a more of the easiest kind of workouts that you said, those of recovery and maintaining the base would be more on the third, like just trying to improve more the aerobic capacity. So basically, working on fat max. Also, we discussed in a previous podcast the benefits of indoor versus outdoor. And I would say that indoor, for someone who's a bit time constrained, would be a really good way of training if you need to improve your aerobic capacity, because it would allow you to use the same amount of power or the same amount of whatever way you want to measure it. If it's running pace as well, you just keep the same power, same pace for the time you're able to use it. Whilst if you go outside, you have traffic lights, you have cars,
exactly.
up hills, down hills, and it's really hard to pace it. You also have wind, which will make the power meter produce a different amount of power. So actually, if you don't have time and you really want to work on your fat max, you can start by using your trainer.
Yeah,
it's not
that's
funny.
a good solution.
If it's sunny, you will feel a bit stupid. But if your goal is to really improve your aerobic capacity and you want to find the best way to do it, I would say indoor is it.
Yeah.
With the ERG, you just do 1 hour at your fat max. You will also be able to evaluate if you are really working on the fat max, if you are overtraining, if you are really not on the fat max. If you are doing the 8 hours at fat max, you're probably not doing fat max.
Yeah, especially for a beginner. For someone who is just starting or doesn't have a lot of load.
If you don't really have the time, you could even try doing it indoor. Also, base training is usually done in the beginning of the season, right? Because it's not a period of time in which you really want to build your fitness. It's just mainly getting back if you have stopped for a week, a month, or if you had a summer of just drinking and partying. So you just want to get back the system going.
But it's also a good opportunity to make some fitness gains.
Yes. Well, it's basically what I was about. Well, just go from nothing to building a base, and now you get ready yourself for the hardest block. So maybe if it's a TT, being able to do long efforts at sweet spot or even threshold. If you're going for a MTB kind of profile, just being able to go open the gas, then recover, open the gas again, and do that many times. Or if you're an ultra distance runner or cyclist, just be able to do it for so many hours to recover from your half hours of sleep. So yeah. Have you seen, what would you say are the common mistakes that people do during base training? Like, if you had to say the thing that you've come across with more athletes, their misconceptions, what would it be?
I think the first mistake in a base period for most of the athletes is not having enough consistency. You will get a lot more adaptations just by staying consistent day to day to day to day. it is how it works. The body will get the adaptations more efficiently if you're doing it every day, no matter the intensity. If you want to be really specific, at some point, yes, but that would be the first mistake. The second one is not doing it consistently, but from a session standpoint.
Yes.
Just like you mentioned, they maybe start too hard, or when it's slightly going uphill, they go above their fat max, so they're getting out, and they're starting to burn a lot more glycogen. So from a metabolic standpoint, you lose that stress on the mitochondria, but also going really easy. People assume that doing endurance is like RPE 1 to 2, which is not really true. That's
for some sessions
true,
is what
but
you want,
yeah,
not for, let's say, a 4 hour in which you are working towards getting more
exactly
aerobic capacity.
And another mistake that actually two more mistakes that I've seen, which are really, really common, is not having like a proper progression, either in terms of intensity or volume. So you want to address your volume every week, every cycle, every month. It doesn't matter. You have to have some kind of progression. You want to be able to start with 1 hour and at some point do 5 hours and so on, or maybe do 6 hours in a week and then 8 hours the next week and so on.
But you also brought an important point. It's being able to measure your progress. For, I'd say, beginner athletes, it's slightly easier because you'll see some really strong signs like getting less heart rate for the same power output, being able to do more hours, both for a week or for an entire ride. Your RP also getting lower. But for those who are immediate to advanced athletes, how would you measure the progress of the base? How do you take a guy who's been racing for 10 years and he has stopped for a long period of time and now he comes back to you, I want to get back on the bike. If he has a really high FTP, a really high aerobic capacity, how do you know that you're building already upon what exists?
One key ingredients is, like we already spoke, the RPE. So you should see some kind of trend in RPE for the same amount of watts. Maybe it goes down, or for more watts, it should stay consistent.
So that's something that's universally key, right?
Yeah,
RP
maybe
for
not like pinpoint a specific session, because there are many
Yes.
variables, but like maybe this block in the first week, you have a different RPE, like an average RPE for the same sessions, endurance sessions, as for the block third of endurance. So that's one good marker to look for. The second one, I would say, is heart rate. Heart rate will drop eventually, uh, but that could also mean other
chronic
things.
fatigue.
So yeah, that should be taken with a pinch of salt, of course, because that could also mean fatigue. But
and then you go on a race and you're completely fresh and you've lost all your aerobic capacity.
For example, after a recovery week, if during the next week of the block, the athlete has a really low heart rate, but during his intervals, his heart rate has a really good recovery rate after, let's say, a VO2 interval, then you know his heart rate is fresh. So the heart rate is low just because he had the adaptation. Also, the resting heart rate could go down like a trend.
it's harder to see for someone who already has a really low heart rate.
Yeah.
If you are between, let's say, around 40, there are very little chances that you see someone just even going lower.
Yeah, true.
So I think that's something you can see in people who are just starting, that they don't really have any kind of fitness, so their heart rate is, let's say, above 50, 60. But again, that's really individual. Women usually have it even higher. But if you come from a beginner and you
Yeah.
work for 3, 4, half a year, then you will see a trend going down.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's something that I wouldn't obsess about it.
Yeah, no,
No,
for sure. You should look like in a holistic
yes,
way.
everything.
Yes, everything should be taken with a pinch of salt, uh, especially if you don't have a bit of experience
Hmm.
in structured training. But yeah, that would be the RPE, the heart rate to power ratio,
Yes,
of course.
at zone
That
2.
Yeah, and yeah, yeah, I would say
So
for
basically,
zone two.
basically that would be dividing your power with heart rate, and that would give you a ratio, and you should see that ratio increase throughout the weeks for the at zone 2. So let's say if in my case, I ride at 250 at zone 2 and my heart rate is 100, then that would be 2.5.
Yeah,
If I want to see any kind of improvement in my cardio, I should see even a higher ratio and my RP staying consistent or even lowering. Because if I can go harder and my
yeah,
RP also be harder and have a higher ratio, and that wouldn't mean I'm improving. So you should always take everything into account
yeah.
and mixing it.
Also, looking at heart rate drift as well.
Hmm.
It could be a good indicator. Like if an athlete has, um, let's say, a heart rate drift after 2 hours
Hmm.
in the first endurance block, and in the fourth one he has after 4 hours, then
Yes.
you know he has uh, really increased
Hmm.
his aerobic capacity and his overall fitness.
Man, and the good thing about heart rate drift is that it's really visual.
Yeah,
So if you're using any application like intervals, IQ, or training peaks, you will see it. And if you are able to keep, let's say, a 3 hour, a consistent pace, you will see the trend of your heart rate. Again, hydration can play a point in your drift, also nutrition, heat.
yeah,
There are many things to take into account. But again, if you're someone that's starting and you're having a decent kind of environment, you will see it despite hydration, the food, and heat. But it's true that if you are dehydrated, your heart rate will most likely get higher throughout the ride or the run. Same if you're not fueling properly, and if you are not adapted to heat and it's really warm, you will even see a higher heart rate drift.
or you can experience it right from the beginning
Yes.
if you don't have any type of adaptation
You also
yet.
spoke about recovery, and it may seem a bit stupid, but why would we recover from something that's already low intensity? And I think that's also an important thing to take into account, that while you should build progress throughout weeks, you also need to let your body just take as much as possible from those weeks and get
Yeah,
back on it again. What are your
so
takes on recovery during base blocks?
just like we mentioned, it's important to have progression. So you want to increase your volume, you want to maybe increase the intensity at which you do the fatmax or the zone 2. uh, but then after you get the stress from the training, you also have to make sure you have a really good periodization, so you're able to take that stress, rest, and adapt from the stress that you've put on your body. uh, you are getting a small amount of adaptation from every session that you did, hopefully. But most of the gains are made in the
Hmm.
upcoming weeks. uh, so if you do a zone 2 session, yeah, your body will adapt the next day, or in 2 or 3 days. But if you do zone 2 for 3 weeks and then you rest, you will get a much higher adaptation from the entire block, rather than one specific day. So it's also important, like you mentioned, to recover, because you only get stronger when you recover.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I remembered,
Okay. Go on.
yeah, I wanted to say that it's also important to have
Okay.
periodization, to have some sort of mix. You don't have to do only zone 2. You will get the benefits of
Mm.
endurance training, but you also have to add some other things
Mm-hmm.
at
Like
some point.
VO2.
Yeah, it can be VO2, it can be some threshold work, some
Mm-hmm.
tempo work. But it's because the body adapts pretty fast to what the stress is,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to change that from time to time, or
And I'd say that while the focus of that block is base training, it doesn't mean that you need to remove the other things. So
yes,
you obviously still need to work on your VO2 because otherwise you'll lose it. Same for your LT. Maybe you lose the feeling of being at LT where it feels maybe your RP on an LT effort is higher. But if
you
you keep training it and at some point when you start focusing on DLT, let's say if you're doing a build block, then you will feel way better than you did. But it's like you always says, like a sound mixer.
yeah,
You can have some things higher than other, while for a specific song, but then and not everything can be at the top, and not everything
yes,
can be at the bottom. You just need to find the perfect mix.
yeah, for what your goal is
Hmm.
and what you're aiming for. Uh, but yeah, there are many things to consider besides base training.
Hmm.
But in order to consider all those things, you have to have a strong fitness to begin with.
Hmm. Well, we now more or less have an idea of what base training is. My next question would be what's the best approach for base training based on your goals? So how would you, for more of an intermediate kind of athlete, if you're going towards a more of a longer ultra distance kind of efforts versus a creed racer or an MTB rider or even a Gran Fondo ones, which are no more than 3 to 4 hour rides, what would be your approach? Like, what would you say the athlete or the guy or woman who's listening to us to work on if they have these different goals?
I would say that the further you are from your event, from your goal, from your race, or whatever the specific event is,
Mm-hmm.
the less structured and the less specific it can be.
Okay.
So let's say we have two athletes. One is aiming for a time trial in June, and the other one is aiming for an ultra distance type of race, also in June.
Yes.
And they start their season, let's say, in November. I would say in November they should start doing more or less the same
Okay.
thing. Uh, Assuming they are more or
Yeah.
less at the same level,
Mm-hmm.
they should start building their endurance and their uh, aerobic
Mm-hmm.
as soon as possible. Um, One of them should try to do more volume. Let's say the time is not uh, a limiter.
Yes.
So both have
Yes.
unlimited time. The ultra distance guy should do, maybe instead of uh, 5 hours of fatmax for a week, for the
Mm-hmm.
first week, he should maybe do 10 hours of endurance riding.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so an RP, a lower RP, but for a
Yeah.
longer period of time. And the closer you get to your event, the more specific you have to get.
Right.
So
That's when building and picking blocks come
yeah,
into play, right? So you would say that for a base kind of period or at the start of your season, it's more just get back on the bike or running again and just do it
yeah, just
at keeping the RP and the zones as expected, but just try to get back the stress and the aerobic capacity.
yeah, exactly.
I think it's also important. The good thing about base is that you can also focus in different things. Let's say nutrition, so you can test different kinds of nutrition, see what works
Yes.
best for really long rides. It's also an important kind of training, nutrition, especially for endurance or even fatmax, because you just burn and burn and burn.
And since you're mentioning that, the guy, the athlete that has to do ultra distance, he
Mhm.
can already start to do the
Yes.
nutrition training because he's gonna need it.
Hmm.
While the time trial athlete, he doesn't really have to train that much
Yes.
for maybe his effort is like 30 minutes.
Yes.
So he doesn't have to do a lot of
Of gut training, because in the end
yes,
you also need to get used to eating that much on the bike. Also seeing what best fits you.
yeah,
Let's say some people may need more of a mix of complex carbs with sugar, and some people like me can just get going by just eating sugar and that's it. Also, I like to make my athletes do 5 hours or really long rides, depending on their goals, obviously, but without stopping. It's not easy to do 5 hours on the bike
no,
without stopping. And there's also a mental aspect that's really important to train while you're doing base training. Like running for 2 hours, even if it's at super easy intensity, it's really hard. It's super easy to stop, and it's also super easy to stop on the bike. So if you are not really used to this kind of long efforts, let's say you want to go to a Gran Fondo, as you said, as we said, with your friends, if you want to quit the bike at the second hour because you are tired and you're used to doing a coffee stop at the second hour, your friends will leave you. So you should also get used to spending a lot of time sitting on the bike or just running. And that mental aspect will help you a lot in then being able to do these really, really long efforts. And if you then have to stop, it's completely fine. But I think
yeah,
it's also a part that's easily forgotten. Like you just go do 5 hours, and just because you do so many hours, then you also stop. But try not stopping and see the difference in RPE. It can be really
yes.
big if you're not used to it.
And the benefits
The
you
benefit,
get
yes.
are yeah, way bigger because it's like splitting your session
Hmm.
in half maybe. So
And note that our body, if we stop, it will do as much as possible to stop. So once you get back on it, there's the saying of, oh, I have coffee legs. But that's basically your body saying, okay, we've stopped. I don't really want to burn more energy,
yeah,
because for your body, we are killing ourselves. So it will do as much as possible to just stop burning, stop your engine, and you will have to work on it again to just get it going. And that's a bit of a, I mean, it's also a kind of, for somebody that's an ultra distance, maybe it's worth doing it,
yeah,
because
exactly.
they'll have to work on stopping and sleeping and then just getting back on it. So
They have to ride on coffee legs. Yeah,
so you need to also see what are your goals and see what you need to identify, and you can use the base season to work on these mental things or these things that are not really intensity focused, I would say, apart from fatmax sessions.
what I found really interesting, that it works for ultra
Mhm.
endurance athletes is if they have an event where they will have sleep deprivation. So they will ride for, let's say, 10 hours, then sleep 1 hour, and then ride again.
Mhm.
You have to do that in training as
Yes.
well.
And also, there are many things that you could also train during base training, like skills. You'll spend so
Exactly.
many time on the bike, and you don't really have to focus on an effort or the fatigue you feel on the leg, so you can maybe do the routes that you will not do during picking. Maybe just, I don't know, just going for the farthest coffee you can find and then coming back. These kind of things
You
that you can
can
work on.
mix
Sport
different
or
sports or disciplines in
mm,
cycling. Maybe you can do some gravel, some mountain bike,
Mhm.
even if you're not a mountain biker and your goal is on the road. That could help you with a bit of core work as well,
Yes.
skills.
It's also a time in which most of pros start doing gym because
Yeah.
you don't really have that much fatigue because you're not really working on that intensity. So you can also stress your muscles on the gym. You then have more time to recover because your endurance sessions, while they are taxing because they are really long, they are not really uh, exhausting on your muscle.
And if you're doing your gym work, your strength training correct from a cycling perspective, you will work mostly your fast twitch. So that means that you can do gym and volume as well
Mm.
in the base period, because during long endurance rides or just endurance rides, you mostly get the stress on your slow twitch.
All right, one last point, I think important. How much base training does an athlete need? Let's say, obviously, a professional, let's say Tadej, doesn't need as much training or base training as someone who's starting. So, how would you recommend somebody to identify how much base training do they need?
Yeah, that would be very dependent on the athlete and their
Mm.
goals and what they want to achieve. What you have to always have in mind is uh, like the entire picture of your upcoming season, or roughly, because maybe you don't know exactly the dates, but you have a rough understanding on where you should have your peak. Um, so based on that, you and your goals, you should be aiming for uh, maybe 2 or 3 endurance blocks, or maybe you need 5 if you're an ultra distance
Mhm.
type of rider. Um,
Usually, what's the duration of a block? Let's say we're thinking about a 4 week kind of block, longer blocks. Like obviously that depends on everyone
yeah,
and the time and
yeah, it would depend on trainability of the athlete. It would depend on how fast he can recover, um, how well he can recover. So based on that, you can have different approaches. You can have 2 or 3 week blocks,
Mhm.
and then 1 or 1.5 uh, weeks of recovery, where you are able to rest, recover, and adapt, get all the benefits of the training. Um, you can also adapt different periodization type of strategies. You can have like a classic periodization where you're aiming for progression
Yes.
every week. So 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours
Mhm.
each week, let's say in a block. But then you can do like a reverse periodization where you start with 12
Yes.
and you get down to 10 and 8 if the athlete doesn't have that good of a recovery,
Mhm.
and you're trying to set the big stress
Yes.
in the beginning of the block. But you can also do like a block periodization type of endurance. So you have a big block where you try to stress as much as possible the fat oxidation. So you have a big block. It can be a training camp. It can be anything uh, endurance related. So you're aiming to do as much volume as possible for 2 weeks, 3 weeks,
Yes.
and then recover, and then aim for another type of block like VO2 or pain tolerance or
Yes.
fatigue resistance or whatever is your next limiter.
Yeah. Well, it's always depending on the goal and
And a very interesting way to address your limiters, it can be just to have in a session, a 5-minute test and a 20-minute test. And based on the difference between the two tests, you can address if your current limiter is your base training or it's your VO2 max.
But that's for next episode. So
Yes.
you'll have to stick to it to know why
You should
is it
subscribe.
important. Yes. No, and yes. And how to determine the difference. So, but yeah, that should be it for today's episode. That's about base training. We hope that you've liked it and it can give you a lot of insights on how to work on your base training, how to work towards your goals with base training. And aside from that, feel free to leave us any comments, anything that you would like to see better. And stay tuned, subscribe and like this episode as we will be posting the third episode of Training Basics soon. So until then, adeu.
Perfecto, adeu.